Hello and welcome back to another presentation in your California geography lesson, this one on California's agriculture. Agriculture is an important part of our history. It's an important part of our morphology and really how we've been so successful as a state. Sure, California's had a very unique past. Obviously, we've had gold, we've had oil, we've had silver, borax, all of these very important um, elements that we've been able to retrieve from the earth. But one of the most successful and consistent would have to be agriculture. So this presentation is going to talk about briefly the history of agriculture as it became profitable. We'll talk about some of those crops. We'll talk about some of the reasons why the agriculture of California is so important, not just for California, but for the nation and for the world. And then we'll talk about just a few different categories of agriculture, things that I thought were more exciting because they're things that I enjoy to eat. So let's just get going. So our past, obviously we've had agriculture since indigenous people roamed the landscape, but we're going to look mostly with the time of 1849 and forward at the gold rush. So obviously people came out west seeking opportunity and wealth for the gold in them our hills, but unfortunately most of them didn't find it in the hills, so they ended up leaving broke. Well, where did they go? Well, they found gold elsewhere, in a sense. They found it in the fields. They were able to find work in agriculture. Between 1850 and 1890, agriculture was booming, and it was huge in California to the point that the soil became unproductive, meaning that it was almost sterilized because it overproduced. That being said, this idea of crop rotation became very, very valuable in sustainability. Meaning that if you continue to grow corn in the same field season after season after season, it's going to continue to take the nutrients needed for that corn. It will leave some nutrients behind, but there's not an equal balance. So what they'll end up doing is they'll grow corn, then they'll grow pumpkins, they'll grow squash. They'll rotate these crops because every crop takes some nutrient from the soil but leaves behind something else. So by rotating the crops makes it a lot more healthier and also more sustainable in that sense. Now, as these farms, grew in the early 1900s, more water was going to be needed because we had to be realistic. If you think about California, it's split in half. Northern California generally has a lot of excess water. Southern California does not. So that being said, with the help of the Los Angeles aqueduct opening up in 1913, they actually saw an increase in farms by 20% and over an additional 1,000 new crops harvested per year. So we find that where water flows, food can grow. Now, during times of drought, though, especially in the Central Valley, we find that there is this hierarchy with water, and agriculture is not at the top. Commercial and our input of consumption of water takes priority over agriculture, which is pretty sad. In fact, there is a county in California, I believe it's Mendocino, I can't think off the top of my head, they were considered the cantaloupe capital of the world, and they, almost as an entire county, were going to file bankruptcy because they had no water, no production, they had no income for that county. It was pretty bad. That being said, of all the improvements made as technology has progressed, as things have gotten better, one thing remains consistent: labor. They need inexpensive labor. The cheaper your labor, the cheaper the product's going to be. The more you charge for labor, then there's going to be an inflation in the cost of your produce. So what I have here on the right-hand side is a little table just showing farmer labor force. So this is in California. So in 1870, 29% of the people in California were involved in agriculture. Moving forward to 2000, we can see that only 1.8% of our population is involved in agriculture. But you can see there's been a certain decline in that, in a sense. It increased 1890, then it dropped between 1900 and 1910. That drop was mostly because of infertile soil. Then we look at the Great Depression, helped increase things a little bit because it brought people out. We'll talk more about that. World War II, decreased, 50 baby boomers, da-da-da-da-da. And so we still see very little as a percentage, but also think about our population. We have now increased our population tenfold, and when you have more population, it's just deemed you're going to have less people working in this type of labor force. So I also bring in, because agriculture also brings in this thought of books and music. You probably think, oh, how does he make that correlation? But just hang with me. So with books, which is actually appropriate for what we're learning, John Steinbeck was born on February in 1902. He grew up in a farming town of Salinas. He began collecting his data and material for when he wrote The Grapes of Wrath by traveling among the Dust Bowl refugees back to California. He had moved to New York and did some things, dropped out of school, blah, blah, blah. Worked his way back with the Okies and all of these people that were migrating to California for a better opportunity because the Dust Bowl had devastated most of your Midwest. So anyway, he writes this book. It becomes huge because it's a genuine, honest story of what a family had to deal with to try to get to California and to just try to make an opportunity for themselves and for their children. And the Kern County Board of Supervisors were so upset about the painting that it was, that it was portraying of what it was like to be in agriculture. They actually banned it from schools. They banned it from libraries, and they were working on making it even a bigger aspect to ban it because you don't want any bad publicity. But he won a prestigious award for it, and everything was dropped. So that's why we mentioned John Steinbeck earlier in the semester, because he writes the stories of the people that worked in this. Now, I also bring in this idea of what's considered the Okie subculture. So Okie is a slang term for those who came from Oklahoma and worked their way out to California. It can be often seen as not quite I don't want to say derogatory term, but it's used as a descriptor for that type of that time. But there were a lot of terms that were used in that time that nowadays can be considered derogatory based on its context. But this phrase of Okie subculture was really pivotal, not just for the labor force, because you're bringing in people to work, but for things that I'm really passionate about. It was huge for music. People brought their music back, over here to California. And then their experiences in agriculture, their experiences in these farmlands, and this very diverse population created some of the most important music that came out of California, known as the Bakersfield sound, also known as Western swing. This style was born in the honky-tonks and the bars that were up in Kern Valley, up in Bakersfield in particular, and became really huge in the 1950s because it was being heard on radios and seen on television. Who were the influences? They say it was Bob Wills, which was the king of Western swing. He was based out of Texas. But what was the final product? People like Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, Dwight Yoakam, and even moving forward into more progressive times, Miranda. Oh, I can't think of her name. Well, you know what I mean. So country music came to California, and then from that, it was able to redevelop into something unique, something special. And if you ever heard like Bakersfield style music, it's really unique because it's classic country. It's going to have your bass, your guitar. It's going to have you're going to have an accordion, which is really unique, and that's also because some of that came from south of the border from Mexico, but you have this mix of music, so it's somewhere between like mariachi and also country music is that Bakersfield sound, which is really neat. But most of it was dealing with what's it like to be a farmer, what's it like to be working on the land, what's it like to be dealing with this diversity, which is pretty cool. So there's more to it than that, but again, this is just a touch base. Moving forward, our agriculture future, California has over 87,500 farms, producing over 350 different crops and livestock products. That's phrased as livestock and crops because we also consider livestock as part of agriculture. That's going to be anything from goats to sheep to cows and things like that. Now, what do you think our top five agriculture pieces are? Okay, well, you think about it. Going in order, number one is going to be grapes. Great for those who drink wine. Fun fact about grapes. During Prohibition, because California produced so many grapes, obviously Prohibition meant no alcohol at all. But the grape farmers were allowed to continue to make alcohol for two reasons. One would be for mass, for those that were Catholic. They still needed to have red wine. But what they were doing is they were actually dehydrating their wine. They would harvest the grapes, produce the wine, and then they would dehydrate it into these weird little blocks. And then they stored these blocks. And after Prohibition, they dumped these blocks into big barrels of water, and then you made wine. It was kind of interesting. Nursery, so we produce a tremendous amount of what's considered floriculture, flowers. Moving forward, lettuces, that's all types of lettuce. And we're looking at tomatoes. Tomatoes being the last one. I can actually leave that box now. And cotton. So we've got grapes, nursery, lettuce, tomatoes, and cotton. I think the only one that caught me off guard when I was learning about this would have been the cotton. I didn't think that we produced that much, but we actually produce it. We have and continue to produce a tremendous amount of cotton. So what about the top 5 exclusive crops? These are things that are only here in California that we produce the majority of. So that being said, the number one thing, almonds. We produce a lot of almonds. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Artichokes, dates, figs, and kiwis. I know. Again, I didn't think we made kiwis, but we grow kiwis in California. We can grow just about everything. Dates and figs, I've seen those. Dates actually do really well out in Panamint and out in the desert. But kiwis are what threw me off. Again, technology advances and limit the amount of hands needed to work on farms, but the demand for labor is still huge. Hard work, long hours, and very little pay. And what the thing that I want to mention is that, especially in today's society, it's not by the hour. Often it is replicated and seen that it's by the hour, but it's really not. Farm workers are not paid by the hour. They're paid by the bushel. They're paid by the box. They're paid by what they're able to produce. So if you're working for 12 hours in the field, and you're picking cilantro, you get paid based on how much you picked, wrapped, and packaged. So you're looking at anywhere, between $50 and $70 a day, picking cilantro all day long. So these are things that we don't think of. I think that more attention has been brought to it during the COVID pandemic, when working in fields is essential, right? We need produce, and so we have people that are out there working for pennies to the dollar to produce and to harvest the produce that we need. And it's a very important job and often not rewarded, because we also live in a society where we want two things. One thing is we want to buy a head of lettuce for $1. So we want everything as cheap as possible so we can buy a head of lettuce for $1, even though it should cost more. And the second thing is that we want to be able to buy produce all year round. Take yourself back into the 80s, the 70s, 60s, even earlier. You could only buy seasonal fruit. What do you mean by that? Well, we have certain seasonal flavors that are available. So you would only be able to buy asparagus in the spring. You would only be buying onions during the fall, but we can buy them all year round, right? And that's because we have the climate, we have the technology, and we have the way to import and export different types of produce. So this is just a list of California's seasonal flavors. By no means am I asking you to memorize this, but I thought it was interesting. Well, persimmons, citrus, apples, grapes, melons, apricots, okra, garlic, celery, leeks, cabbage, beets, and endive. What the hell is an endive? I had to look that up. I've seen them before. They're usually fancy. It looks like a cabbage, but they're elongated. Peas, peppers, turnips, radishes, rhubarb. That's why rhubarb and strawberry pies do really well, especially at Knott's Berry Farm. So we've got all kinds of different seasons that we produce. So when we don't have, peas, if we want to buy peas in the winter, but they're not available, then we're going to have to import them from somewhere else. Usually from places such as Chile and Peru and stuff like that. Usually places south of the equator when their seasons swap. But we want produce all year round, so we'll rotate our crops to be, we'll grow asparagus first. We may move to celery, then we'll move into carrots, and then we'll start, onions again. And so each crop will continue to rotate. Now, bigger produce, such as like citrus and nuts, those trees can last between 7 and 40 years. So if you drive along the 126 heading out towards Ventura, a long time ago, it used to be walnuts. Then the walnuts quit producing, so they tore them all out. They put in citrus, the Valencia orange. Then they ended up tearing, not all, but a lot of those out. And now we're working more towards avocado. So let's talk about the citrus revolution. I picked these images. I think they're absolutely stunning. So we had this revolution of citrus in California. In fact, the biggest producer and style of orange that's sold in California was actually brought here and came from one plant. The plant still is in existence in Riverside, but we had this revolution. And I'm going to bring specifically Los Angeles County and Ventura County into this. So what fascinates me most about the fact that citrus grows well, that's great, is these. I love the labels that were put on these boxes. This is one from the Fillmore Citrus Association showing the seasons of Fillmore. So citrus and fruit labels were designed to sell not just the product, but to sell California. It's selling the dream of California. The first orange groves, they were based out of the first orange groves ever were in the Mission of San Gabriel, but they were seeded oranges. They came from Spain. That being said, the seedless orange actually came out of Riverside. Um, Citrus was huge for us because it was a major combatant for survey. No, scurvy. No, there we go. It's for scurvy, which was a disease the 49ers were dealing with. Moving forward, Santa Paula had the world's first large scale, oh my gosh, spelling errors everywhere, I'm sorry, scale production plant. They're the ones who designed these packing labels to entice the world. The main company that first did it was called Liminaria. Then Sunkist was a name given to the produce that was of the highest grade. Why was this important? Well, because we were growing things, we needed labor. So what they would do is the citrus organization got involved with the Southern Pacific Railroad. They sent oranges out east. And then on these packages, they put in these different labels in order to entice people, because most people in New York had never really even seen an orange, let alone being able to see one during the winter. So to be able to buy these produce, they're trying to say, hey, come to California, it's beautiful. So I have a handful of packing labels from California and around. Here's one, teenage Western vegetables, selling these products of Watsonville, California. So these were unused, but these would have been slapped onto a wood box, some glue would have been put on it, and then this would have been shipped out, and these would have been the labels on the side. Here's one. These are Yakima Chief Choice evaporated apples. These were out of Washington State. I mean, yes, the detail and the artwork, and this was not just about the fruit. This was about selling this idea of coming out west. Triton apples, the Triton company. So these are just, and these that I'm showing you here are about 100 years old. Here's one. These are the Washington Dehydrated Food Group, 25-pound box of, again, dehydrated apples. Look at how beautiful that landscape is in the background. I would assume that this is some volcanic structure out in Washington State, right there along the Cascades. I love these. I'll say these for last because I love them. Topaz apples. And then here I got another one here. I love this one. Look at the colors. Pep brand. This is out of Visalia. Look at the colors they used on these to sell this fantasy, this design. You know how beautiful this woman is, and the men playing music, and she's dancing with her tambourine and her beautiful dress, trying to again sell not just the fruit, but it's a product of the USA. Come out to California, and you can see those people dancing. And then these are just so funny to me. So we have Snowboy. Snowboy was a popular, again, out of Washington State apple company. And you can't just have a Snow Boy. You also had the Snow Maid. Snow Maid. I love her little thing to keep her hands warm. Pacific fruit and product company in Yakima again. And this is 1 bushel by volume. So you would have had these slapped onto the container of these boxes to sell and to entice people to California. So they were, again, on this train passing out oranges, and these were on the crates or passing out crates. Like, wow, California looks so beautiful. They didn't have a Google. They couldn't wiki what California looked like, so they were trusting these. Since citrus needed so much intensive labor, this actually created an incredible diversity in California because of the constant need for cheap labor. It literally brought people from around the world. By the early 1900s, citrus was the second most profitable powerhouse in the state, just behind oil. Oil is interesting for us as well because we have one of the first oil towns in California, Mentryville, right here in Santa Clarita. But without the orange, many historians and many geographers argue the fact that California would not have seen the growth that it did during the last 100 years. Because think about it, we have biotech, aerospace, Silicon Valley, we've got Hollywood, we've got all these tremendous businesses and industries that have been out of California, and a lot of people pay tribute to the fact it was citrus, it was agriculture, because it brought diversity from people from around the world to California. And then because of that diversity, because of those different minds, you end up creating new thoughts and processes, and then that's how you really create a great sustainable environment. So I think a lot of the information and the knowledge was brought here because of that diversity, and without the we probably would have had those things anyway, but they don't. Many people don't think that it would have happened as soon as it did. Let's talk about a couple of my favorite crops. The avocado. Ooh, I love avocados. The Hass avocado was introduced in 1935 with nearly 85% of all avocados deriving from this family. They actually cover over 60,000 acres in California, and we produce over 400 million pounds annually of avocado. Before the trade agreement with Mexico, California provided the United States with 90% of all of their avocados. Now that there's an agreement with Mexico, there's a competing factor between California avocados and Mexico avocados. We usually find that we can battle them out between. They're not usually at the same time that we can have them during harvest. Ventura alone produces 35% of all the avocados in the world. Crazy. Love me some avocados. Boysenberries. Ooh, I love boysenberries. So at the beginning, covering over 2,400 acres in California in 1954 at none other than Knott's Berry Farm. By 2008, there was only 70 acres. And then in 2018, they quit counting because it's really just in if you ever visit Knott's Berry Farm, there's like 2 places there that have boysenberries, and they don't even use them for anything. So it's very sad to think that that was what built an empire, and now they're there as to pay homage to, but they're not the main piece. Now, in the 1920s, Rudolph Boysen was crossing blackberries with raspberries, and when he moved to Anaheim in 1923, he took some of his plants with him. Boysen soon shifted his attention to citrus and sold his plants to Walter Knott, who was doing his own thing with the chicken dinners and stuff like that, and he ended up growing them at his berry place in Buena Park. So now, where did the boysenberries come from that we consume? Actually, they come from New Zealand. We mentioned floriculture earlier. This is over $2 billion in income from nurseries. We have Armstrong Nurseries in Southern California. We've got Monrovia Nurseries out in Monrovia. We've got all kinds. But the one thing I wanted to pick out was the poinsettia. That was originally, if you go way back, down in Mexico, is an Aztecian flower. But it wasn't until a German immigrant, Mr. Eck, came to Eagle Rock in 1900 that this plant actually turned into a huge holiday add-on. So what he would do is he was growing them. They're very hard to grow, and he actually helped design different shades and colors of them. But he would send the plants to television stations for them to use during the holidays. Why? Well, because at that point they were transitioning in the 1950s from black and white to color television. And if you've seen a poinsettia, they're very bright and vibrant. So he sent them to people such as Bob Hope to put on Bob Hope's Christmas specials in order to promote the plant, because people who were just getting color TVs, these crazy vibrant colors, were really what are those? What are those? And then they would buy them. And then the last one, the almond. These produce over $6 billion in income alone, and we produce 80% of the world's almonds and 100% of the United States supply in California alone. It is the most valuable exported crop, even though China charges a 50% tariff on California almonds. That's a political thing. We're not going to get into politics. So China does try to get most of theirs from India, but ours are superlative. They're larger. They're very large almonds versus the small ones. So that's why they're so expensive. Now, the problem is each nut needs 1.1 gallons to grow. So if you have a handful of, maybe 10 almonds, you're looking at 11 gallons of water was needed for those 10 almonds. Well, why is it a big deal? Well, because the almond thrives in drought areas, such as the Mojave. We have lots of almond farms out in the middle of the Mojave. Almonds are still picked the same way, which is absolutely, if you've never seen it, you got to Google it. They wrap this rope around a tree, and they just shake the tree as hard as they can to get all the almonds to fall off, and then they go and they pick them all up. But it's still done the same way that we've always done it. Agriculture is huge. It's very important for us, yet it's so often wasted. Something I want to leave you with, which is a statistic that I hate to share, but also I think it's important to. In the United States, of all the agriculture that is produced, 40% of that agriculture never leaves the farm. It's thrown away. It's considered a loss. Why? Because it doesn't meet market standard. It's too big, it's too small, it's too round, it's too pointy, it's got a bruise, it's got a bump. So we throw away 40% of our produce from the get-go, which if we didn't, that'd be enough produce to provide every homeless shelter, senior citizen home, and beyond, and schools fresh produce. But that's a different story. Then by the time it gets to where the distribution center and it gets to where it's going to go, they get crushed, they get squished. We find that the longer that this produce has to travel, the quality and the value of it the value increases because it costs more, but the quality usually decreases because it's had a longer time being traveled to. That's why it's more important and most important to buy local fresh produce that lasts longer, doesn't need sprayed preservatives, and you're also going to be buying genuine stuff. Another thing to think about, like orange trees or avocados, maybe you've seen those little stands on the side of the road. Here's a fact, here's a law about it as well. If the fruit falls off the tree onto the ground, so you're picking it and you drop it, once it touches the ground, it's considered contaminated and cannot be sold. So those are the oranges that end up just getting picked up and put on your roadside stands because there's nothing wrong with it. They have packaging on them. They clean them and they put them there. But if a fruit falls from a tree and it's not connected when it gets put in the box, it's considered damaged goods. Insane. So just remember, waste not, want not. Think of the amount of water that's needed. So you throw a bag of almonds away. How many gallons of water did you throw away? And this is something to really think about when we're living in a time when we're trying to achieve sustainability, when we're trying to find to create a place where we don't waste and that we have plenty of produce and food and fresh produce for everyone. We cannot afford to waste our resources like this. So make sure that you take care of the food that you need, consume the produce, buy what you need when you need it. And that being said, thank you for watching. Don't forget to click subscribe and check out some other videos, and we'll talk soon.